Birdcast, Great Backyard Bird Watch, the winter feeder watches, backyard feeder watch things. It all comes through the University of Cornell. They're not the only university in North America doing a lot of bird stuff, but they have the biggest infrastructure of those things that we use for reporting birds, documenting birds, also serving as a news area for citizen science, for folks like us going out saying I had these 4, 5, 6 birds in my house, and then putting them on this big, huge map that we're going to look at. This is a citizen science resource that is vetted by people. And so if you submit something, right, you put in a checklist. If there are things on that checklist that don't make sense, which happens a lot because sometimes if you look at latitude and longitude and you don't put negative 92 point whatever, and you put positive 92 point whatever, you're on the other side of the world. And that happens. Believe it or not, you get reports of South American species in the middle of Kansas. They're not in the middle of Kansas, somebody just didn't enter their data right. So there are people who check on that stuff, which is really cool. So much so that this is a resource now that researchers can use for larger scale projects, right? We don't have all the money in the world to do projects, we don't have all the money in the world to travel for those projects. And so this is one of those ways people can get a lot of data very, very fast without having to spend all the time or effort or money or resources out in the field to do it. They can rely on people here, right? Which is really cool. So we're gonna go through a few different things. You used to be able to access eBird without making an account. You can't do that anymore for a very good reason. Poaching birds is the big reason. There are some species that even if you wanted to find, you can't because they don't want them to go away. For us in Minnesota, there are a few species listed as sensitive. Great gray owl, northern hawk owl, boreal owl. Out east you might deal with snowy owls or most of our rails, king rail, black rail. In the tropics it might be scarlet macaw, it might be yellow cardinal, it might be painted buntings. Species that are very common in the bird trade are often hidden. And now you do have to make an account to access that, but before it was basically just kind of the Wild West a little bit. So I got an account, so we don't have to make one right now. I'm not going to show you how to do that. But it will ask you. It will ask you to get started. It will ask you to learn more, unless you have registered already, and you can sign in. So
it's very easy.
Yep.
To sign up.
And so we're just going to sign in with my stuff. Here's all my other things. That's me. Okay. And then when you sign in, what you get is this. This is now the Minnesota portal. So eBird just did a huge update where they updated their fonts and everybody was mad, and they updated how they report stuff and everybody got mad. It's fine. It's really nice to have the updates that they have. But this is for me. So this is my stats for Minnesota. You can go out as broad as you want to see how did you do in the world. You can go as narrow as you want. How am I doing in the county? So this is me for Minnesota. 343 species in Minnesota. We're gonna do it today. 3,600 checklists in Minnesota today. That's pretty good. How many photos, audio, that sort of stuff. That all comes through this little portal here called My eBird. And so what you can do here is look at all of your stuff, right? So here's me, a new profile. You don't have to do all of this. But that's what I'm at in the world, 768 species in the world, 4,000 checklists submitted. And it's basically your clearinghouse, right? This is where all of your data is in a place where you can see it. So we can scroll down and see Minnesota. We can do this. And if we wanted to see the world, we can do the world. Here's how many species we've seen in the world. And so it's pretty functional in that way. It gives you your latest checklists. If you scroll down, you can see your photos you've taken. You can see how many places you've been and all of that. Does this matter much at all to just a user of eBird? No. The deeper in you get, yes, it becomes more interesting, right? If I go back to Minnesota, I can see that here are my counties in Minnesota. So St. Louis County, 308 species. I can see how many I've seen this year, and I can see how many I've seen this month. I can do that with every county that I've visited, and I've submitted a checklist with a bird on it in the state of Minnesota. I can do that for Wisconsin, I can do that for Iowa, I can do that for North Dakota, all the places that I birded. You can see it, right? So if you wanted to remember, oh, I was in Washington County, where did I go? I don't remember. If you put it in a checklist, you know where you went, and you know, oh, I liked that state park. I wonder how many birds I had there, right? You can search all that stuff. So this is just from your perspective. They do have a little map, and now that they updated it, I don't know where the little map is, because little map's fun. No, I don't want that. Well, there's also a little map that they give you, which is really cool. Is it this one? Please be? Yes! This is what I wanted to show you. So this is another really good tool here. Again, all that data, but in visual form. If you wanted to see where have I been, where are the places that I need to go, where are the things that I've seen, that sort of thing. And again, if you zoom out, then you can see the U.S., and you can see we've been to Washington, Colorado, all these places, right? You can navigate, kind of see what you've done and what you haven't done. But again, that's just for you, that's just for fun. All of this is already done for you. I don't have to do any of this. All that data is just submitted, and it's there, and it's ready to go. So let's look at some of those features. Before we submit a checklist, I'm going to show you this portal, which is the Explore portal. When we're looking for stuff, right? When we're looking for birds, when we're looking for places to go look for birds, this would be the place to go for that. So as far as like people using eBird in this way, this is a really useful portal. You can do it by species, right? If you just wanted to look at birds, right? You're not like me and have 75 field guides on your shelf, right? You could do this instead. And so you can also say surprise me. So let's see what that does. We can click on it. And it shows us Sri Lankan whistling thrush. It shows us photos of Sri Lankan whistling thrush. It tells us it's endangered. Gives us some notes on ID. There's some sound. And then you get this map. And so really the nice thing about eBird, whether or not we've seen Sri Lankan whistling thrush, we know where it is, right? We could go and say, okay, we know it's in Sri Lanka, but based on how purple our little squares are, shows you the greatest density of where that bird is. So if we were visiting Sri Lanka for some reason, and we wanted to see this bird, our best chance is right in that little square. And so we can zoom in on that little square, and we can see what's going on. This one might be hidden because it's not giving us anything at all. And that's just fine. So this bird, because it's endangered, is hidden. We just know that's a good place to start looking, right? So let's find another bird. Does anybody have a bird they'd like to learn more about right now?
I'm curious about the red-bellied woodpecker because they're over here, but they're not at night.
Red-bellied woodpecker. Let's do it.
So because that bird is
Nope.
endangered,
Sweet.
you want to tell you more about where it's located? Is that it?
Correct. Yes.
I mean, in other words, that's a bird that
Correct. Yeah. For one reason or another, maybe it's because it's rare, maybe because it's getting poached. That. So red-bellies. So if we look at our range map for red-bellied woodpecker, here they are. Here's all the red bellies, and if we open this up bigger, we can get some better clarity here. So let's zoom in. So again, all this black, all this dark, this is the heart of the range of red-bellied woodpecker. And the lighter you get, so in our case, the further north that you get, that is just going to be fewer birds reported. Maybe it's a one-time bird, made its way north of Winnipeg, and that was that. But the heart of the range is purple here. So let's just zoom in to where we are here in Duluth. And if you can see, even for Minnesota, most of our red-bellied woodpeckers, as we let it load, are in the southeast. There's not very many in the western part of the state. There's not very many in the bogs around Red Lake, right? Which makes a lot of sense. Red-bellied woodpecker is a deciduous forest bird. It's not in bogs. And so if we keep zooming in on the Duluth area, we're zooming in, we're still zooming in, we'll get to some clarity where it will show us where they've been. Unless we have to do it the other way. It's going to make me do it the other way. It's going to make me do it the other way. Okay, that's fine. So there's another way to explore. So if we go back to explore and we want to answer that red-bellied woodpecker question, we want to go to species maps. So we went to explore, I'll go back to that fast. Explore under species maps. And then we can search red-bellied woodpecker again. Red-bellied woodpecker, because it should be giving us this clarity here.
you're gonna have to go look at your Sri Lanka bird and see if it's
See if it's hidden again or if it's just because we were remote.
No, I'm curious.
So it's loading. There we go. Okay. So this is a little nicer.
Already forgot about the camera.
So the closer you get, yeah, this is over. Alright, so this is over. Okay, so all of these points, those are all of the places somebody has reported a red-bellied woodpecker in the Duluth area. The blue ones are older than a month. So let's say somebody had one in January, that's going to show up as blue. All the orange, that is within the last 30 days. So this is, again, a really useful tool, right? I'm going to Phoenix, I want to know if there were crystal thrashers or whatever, right? You can go and zoom in on Phoenix and you can see where all the blue dots are and where all the orange ones. Orange is where they probably are. But let's say there weren't any orange, it was all blue. That tells us a couple things that we'll get into later. But if we zoom in, we can see that this guy right here that's got a little flame on it, we'll keep zooming in. That's Bagley, right? And so we can click on that and we can see recently, there we go, April 25th, that was the last time anybody had a red-bellied woodpecker at Bagley. So or just were. Doesn't mean there weren't some there before, but somebody using eBird reported one there as early as the 25th. If we zoom out again, we can see just scattered around here. Have we reported them recently? Probably. So anyways, you can explore this, and this is again really useful if you have the one thing you want to see, right? If you had a target species that you were really interested in finding, this is a great way to do it. It's also a great way to take apart a big landscape. So I just had somebody ask me about the bog the other day. And so if we just go to the bog, all of this is the Saxon bog. There's a lot of these little hot spots, and I'm going to have to really crack down the red bellies because there aren't this many red bellied woodpeckers in the bog. So I need to send Jim Lynn an email. But we could click and we could say, oh, this person had one in June over here. We can also do something that's really fun to confirm some of those sightings, is we can do this, where it says explore rich media. That means we can see photos and video and any audio recordings, which is really useful, right? If you don't know what the bird looks like, or you forgot your book at home and say, gosh, I saw this thing, you could go and look through all the photos. So we could click on photo here, and we can say this person's got a photo from the 22nd. We can click on that, and that shows us the list that this person had. And it's all photos, and we can see, yep, there's a red-bellied woodpecker in his photos. We know it was the correct observation. Really useful tool there. But sometimes there are species who don't have a lot of photos, and so it's not very useful here. But again, just to give you an idea, if we zoom back out, you can see where the biggest density of red-bellied woodpecker is. This is a southern bird, right? They've only recently gotten up here. There's another way we can sort that data too, but I want to show you more with Explore. So back into Explore. So we can go through the species portal, so we can investigate species, whatever we want. We can go deeper in that data analysis or looking for more data by going on species maps. You could look at hotspots, which we'll talk about in a second. So if you remember our little flame little guy in the middle of that orange, Bagley was a hotspot. This is a more interesting tool, I think. So hotspots are, the purpose of hotspots in eBird is to note locations that are frequently utilized by birders, right? Your backyard, you might not make that a hotspot, right? You might have the same checklist every day. Don't make your backyard a hotspot. Bagley, sure. Park Point, sure. There are a few places that we would make hotspots. So let's zoom into Duluth again. Come on in. And you can see there are a lot of hotspots along Park Point, which makes a lot of sense, right? A lot of birders on Park Point, a lot of people on Park Point. But there's also different public accesses on Park Point. And most of these hotspots note those public accesses. So again, if you're going to a new place, you don't quite know where to go, it's really useful to look at hotspots sometimes because they can tell you, oh yeah, over on 37th, I might be able to see some good ducks on 37th Street on Park Point. There's access to the bay. If If we go down to 22nd or so, 22nd, we see there's a hot spot here on 22nd because there's a public access there on 22nd Street on Park Point. So hotspots are a great way to delineate access in some cases. Not always, because sometimes it's a little more difficult to see, but that can be useful there. They give you a really lovely color temperature. So if you had like 25 minutes, right, where do I go to find the most birds? Well, you could just look for anything that's in the orange or darker colors, and you can see that on Park Point. We have two of those. We've got the Dune Bridge at the airport. 256 species have been seen there. We can go over here to just the recreation area in general. 290 species there. What this doesn't tell us is where to go, though, right? It just tells us that there have been 290 species seen. So that's why in some cases they're useful, some cases they're not. This one here in the middle of nowhere, 247. Again, not very useful. Where are those 247 species? Hard to say.
Does it have a time period for that, or that's just like?
It does. Yeah. Yep. So let's click on it. So if we click on View Details, we can see just about everything we want. So here's for the month of May, 78 species have been reported from 34 checklists by 31 eBirders. Pretty cool. We can see that on the 15th of May, that's the most recent reported species. So that's great crested flycatcher. And we can keep going down to just the new things, right? We can hit this little button here. We can just look at this year. So from January 1, 92 species from 72 checklists from 66 people. Again, oh, there's me, little video. Very quick, it updates pretty regularly. You can look at a month. You can also look at all time. And I know they moved it, so this might take me a little bit. You used to just be able to go right here, click it, but let's click on all species. Here we go. So if we wanted everything, we could click on this all years button, and that shows us everything. By the first observed, we could do by the last observed if we wanted, so that's the most recent. We could do it by high count, how many Canada geese has somebody reported, that's always fun. Let's see, it's loading. So high count, I've got the high count for red-winged blackbird, it looks like. That's not very impressive. But you can sort by the date, you can sort by the count. It's really useful, right? So again, when was the most recent whatever? We can scroll down the list. This is going to sort it by checklists reported. So not by taxonomy, not by the number, it's by how recently were they reported. So we can scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we can see that in 2013 was a Western/Clark's Breed by Petter. It could be later than that, right? Historical data is allowed. So if you have books and books and books and books full of notes with locations, you can enter those. And sometimes if it's a rare enough species, they will end up at the bottom, which is unfortunate for them, but that's okay. So slash is hybrid. So the last thing, here you go. Last time a short-eared owl was eBirded on that hotspot was 1973. There have been short-eared owls since then, but not from that hotspot or not from that point, which is really cool. You can see most everything else though, 2008, 2016, and then on up.
Everything on there, or is there anything that you would choose not to put on there?
Great question. Let me ask if there are any other questions for this, and then let's get into a checklist. So,
I was just going to ask you, that short-eared owl, do you think that's because that was masked now? That's
great question. No, because we could just move to the Dune Bridge, and this spring there were short-eared owls from that checklist, or from that hotspot, right? Exactly. So because Park Point is so heavily birded, there's a lot of chunks. That place has been chunked up into different pieces, different hotspots, to make it easier for people to find stuff. We can go back and we can look at that too from the map here. All right, get to the map. Zoom in on Park Point. So in that stretch, those short-eared owls have been reported from over here. And so if we click on, I think this one or this one, probably this one. There we go. All right, So if we clicked on this migration watch site, that one would have a shorted out much earlier than that because they had it from there. But again, it's useful to sort of break it up into pieces sometimes. Sometimes it's not easy to do that, but it's a useful way, especially when, if you are a user of this, we would hope to improve things, right? And so it makes sense sometimes to write notes and do that sort of stuff. So any other questions on this explore function from hotspots?
Not about the Explorer,
Okay.
but the hotspots?
Yeah.
You said you can make something a hotspot?
Yeah.
But then, if you wanna just submit data,
Mhm.
can you do it without, like, sharing where you live?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Let's do that when we submit a checklist. We can talk about what to do in that case. Very good. Okay,
How
so
far back does eBird go? I don't know if it started.
great question. Let's see. So eBird was started in the 2000s, early 2000s, but data submissions can go as far back as you want. So certain bird committees will submit all of their records into eBird. So you can find records from the 1800s in eBird. It didn't exist then. But if you have documentation, you have specimen data, you could conceivably enter that data. You would enter it under historical data, so not like more recent active data. But you can find very, very old records. So I think, let's just see. We'll test it. We'll see if they've got passenger pigeon here. 'Cause I think they do. Oh, that's the hotspot. Never mind. We'll explore. Species. Let's see if they've got passenger pigeon data. They do. So in these locations, people have went and entered that historical data. So let's go over to Toronto here. That's gonna hide it. Toronto, here we go. So 1896. And so this is from those historical documents from organizations, right? Before we had this, we had papers. People would write papers, submit data to those birding journals. And so you can see exactly the basis for the submission of this record. It gives you all the notes possible for those really old things. So if you do want to submit historical records, definitely include at least this much data, right? Don't just, go back, you found a book from the 1920s and somebody wrote something in it. And probably don't put that in there, but from a journal like this, super. You can also see what they did here, and we'll talk about this when we go through submitting a checklist. But they submitted this as incidental and incomplete, which means they don't have the, for sure, total other birds that were also present. They know that we're going to report these passenger pigeons, and that's what they're only reporting, right? So incidentals are really nice. They're not nearly as useful as complete lists. They're still useful, right? If you're driving on the highway and you saw a red-tailed hawk and you wanted to put it down, do it, but submit it as an incidental. So back a long ways. But yeah, usually it's more for updated data. You can see there's a note here. They made a note they submitted in 2014. So as much notes as you can with these old records, but they're still useful. They're still important data. Especially considering how things have changed on the landscape. A few years ago, I was talking with a guy who lived in Florida, and he was going back through all of his bird books when he was a kid, and he was putting down checklists for all those old locations he birded. And he got emails from the reviewers that said, hey, are you sure? And he said, yeah, 50 years ago, this wasn't a housing development. This was a wetland, or this was this. And so in that case, very, very useful to submit that data. Really, really important to submit that data because it shows you how things change. Okay. Explorer, there's one last thing I want to look at, but I guess we'll do it now. It's bar charts. I love bar charts. So this is really fussy and it's a little clunky. So what bar chart says, it shows you basically the phenology of birds through your area. So when do they show up? When do they leave? When do we see the most of them? When do we see the least of them? So again, if we're putting ourselves on this hypothetical trip we've been talking about, we want to know where to go, we can look for hotspots. We want to know a species, we can go to explore species. But if you just wanted to say, when do I want to go here, right? I would suggest for you to go to bar charts. So we're going to click on Minnesota, and we're just going to click on counties in Minnesota, and we're going to continue. And then we're going to go to St. Louis County, because that's where we are. And what this shows us is all of the bird data from 1900, that's in eBird, to 2024, that's in eBird, and how the birds that we see get reported. And so if we just scroll a little bit here, let's look at this section of waterfowl here. So pintail, green-winged teal, canvasback. You can see that there are very big peaks for some of these species, and then there are valleys where there are no observations of those species. So okay, let's say you want to go to St. Louis County and you want to see canvasback. Well, they're not reported very frequently because those are not very big green bars. They're fairly short green bars. But you can also see that if you wanted to see one, your best bet here is probably April or October. Those are your best bets, right? We can visualize that further. These little guys here, this is for location. So this little thing that looks like a flag that has a little checklist spot on it. But let's look at the line graph. And you can see very clearly about a little after April 15th is when you want to look for canvasback. If you wanted to be that specific, right? You really wanted a canvasback, you could do that. And then in the fall, we could say somewhere the week of October 15th or so, we'd want to go look for canvasback. So it's really useful. I really, really like bar charts for this visual ability. Because again, if you are planning a trip somewhere and you want to make the most out of your time, this is a great way to do it. And again, under bar charts. Oh, the little tabbies. Yep. So you can change this around if you want with abundance, and that's basically how many birds are reported per checklist. So again, it's a scale, but you can still see here that, oh, we refined it a bit, and now our peak is about the 22nd of April. That's when people are reporting the greatest number of canvasback. Or over here in October, about the 22nd of October is the highest number of canvasback. You can do it by birds per hour, you can do it by high count, total count, average count. There's lots of ways to look at the data. And again, use it as you will. It's only as useful as you want it to be. Like birds per hour, that's pretty useful. So birds reported per party hour. So now we're back to about the 15th again for the most canvasback. So anyways, it's telling us between the 15th and 22nd. If we go there, we're good. Everything's good. Okay, back to explore. So explore species is useful. Species maps, hotspots, bar charts. Regions, fine. That's just taking like the state of Minnesota and saying, here's what you can see in the state of Minnesota. Useful, but not nearly as useful as those other pieces, I don't think. We're not going to talk about any of this. Just know there are more ways to analyze your data or get alerts or all that sort of stuff. We won't talk about that today. But we will talk about submitting a checklist, right? So let's say you want to contribute to science. You want to contribute to citizen science by putting in data, by submitting checklists. You do that by clicking this button, by submit. Once you make a report, you have these. So to your question, I don't want to make my yard a hotspot when I want to report in my yard. You can just keep reporting to the same point that you make. So our yard is in the C's. I submit a lot of checklists, so it takes a while. This one, so Chester Creek neighborhood. That's the spot we use for our yard. It's not in our yard, and it's not a hotspot, but we have the same point. So we can keep reporting to the same location every time. You don't have to make a new location every time, right? I don't know.
Then we don't have people creeping on our yard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of by close to you, but not. Really.
Correct. Yep. And so then what do you do there, right? Is it important to be as exact as you can? In some cases, it's not your yard. If you're fine with people looking at your yard potentially, go ahead. If you're not, don't. Put it down the block. You can also hide your observations too if you wanted to do that. So then it's just for you. I know this because the house that I grew up in southern Minnesota, I had a winter where we had a good number of hair sparrows that overwintered. We had 26 hair sparrows overwintering in our yard. And I know other people went to see those birds because they told me. And that's a little weird. So, as fine as you want, I've never birded at Bagley, so we're gonna just look for it. or at least I've never submitted a checklist there. So we're in St. Louis County. All of these extra dots helps us refine, right? Because St. Louis County is so darn big, we want to zoom in pretty close. We can do it manually, or we can click on one of these little guys here. And that, again, shows us all the hot spots, and we can keep zooming in until we find the University of Minnesota, and we find this dot, which is Bagley Nature Area. So we're going to go continue. And it's going to ask you for a few things, pretty standard things. The day you were there, were you traveling, were you not? So we can use the calendar, click on it that way. 16th, we were traveling, and we started at 6:30. We started at 5:30. Oops, 5:30 p.m. We birded for 1 hour. We walked, I don't know, let's say we walked a third of a mile. And then we had, how many other people we had? 1, 2, 3, 4, we had 7 or 8 people maybe? We can fix this later. Comments, if we wanted to say we took the trail right and then we went around the lake, we could write that note if you wanted. You don't have to. Because it's a hot spot, and we didn't see anything like super earth-shattering, I wouldn't write any notes. If you went here and you found a rare thing, maybe say, oh yeah, I was walking the trail to the right and we passed the big cottonwood tree or something, right? You could make those notes because people do read them, especially if you think of it, if you were visiting a place and you wanted to go see that thing, it might be useful to write a note or two. I'm not gonna write any notes, I'm gonna continue. And now what it's gonna show us is a list of all the birds that we would expect with some regularity in St. Louis County in the month of May. That's how it breaks it down. This list is totally different in January than it is in June. And so as we go, you'll see that it changes. You can do one of two things to submit your birds. You can just scroll through and find it, or you can go jump to species, and we could type in, oh yeah, we knew we had a mallard. I don't want to scroll for it. I could type mallard into there, and it'd bring us to mallard. So mallard was our first bird. We had one mallard. Come on, catch up. There we go. We had one mallard, and we're gonna put 1. You could put 0 if you found a dead mallard. They don't like to report dead birds, but 0s are useful for dead things or birds you were hoping to see but you didn't find. So let's say I was going there because mallard would have been a life bird and I saw no mallards, I could put 0. Or just not report it. I would just not report it, but you do see 0 sometimes. So we had 1 mallard. We had no other ducks, so we're gonna keep going. We didn't have any grouse. We didn't have any grebes. We didn't have any pigeons. We didn't have any. Didn't have pigeons. How many pigeons did we have? We had 5 pigeons. Great. No swifts, no nighthawks, no hummers, no rails, no shorebirds. We had gulls. We'll say we had about 15 green-billed gulls. You can be exact or you can be general. Exact is nice. General is just as useful as exact, though. So if you don't want to count 1,500 pigeons on the top of a building, you could just say 1,500. You can just write estimate if you wanted to. If you counted exactly 1,500, I would put a little note in there that said counted by 1 or counted by 10.
If you want to count that, you want to guesstimate both our lake gulls and the lake.
Yep, you can do that.
800.
Yep. And I will tell you the one thing about human beings is that we are always low, always. You will never overestimate something, we will almost always underestimate.
In general, you can certainly overestimate.
Yeah.
Clinton is known for it, but.
So we had 15 ring-billed gulls, no pelicans, no cormorants, no herons, no raptors, no owls. But guess what? We had a kingfisher. So we're gonna put 1 kingfisher.
Three woodpeckers.
We had 4 woodpecker species.
4.
We had a sapsucker.
Okay.
We had a pair of downy woodpeckers. You see this option for eastern. If you knew the subspecies of that bird, you could put it in. I don't know how to tell the woodpecker subspecies apart, so I'm not going to do that. Except for flickers. We know we have yellow-shafted flicker up here, so we're going to go ahead and use yellow-shafted flicker. Subspecies are really only for you depending on where you are in birding. If you only know about northern flicker, put in northern flicker. If you know that our flickers are yellow shafted and there's a red shafted out west, and there's Guatemalan subspecies in Guatemala, there's one in the Yucatan that's different, you could do that. You don't have to, but you could. So hairy woodpecker as well. Two of those. If we wanted to, since we found the downy woodpecker nest, right, we could go into add details. And what we could do is go under breeding here and choose the highest possible breeding code. And we have a pair in suitable habitat at a minimum, right? Because we know that there was a cavity. We could say nest building, or we could say woodpecker wren nest building, because they'll build dummy nests sometimes, so they might not be in that nest. If we saw them physically building it or entering the nest, we might choose occupied nest. And I'm going to put occupied nest because that's a pair that was in that area and they're probably in that hole because they were right next to it the whole time. So you can do that as well, which is really fun. No kestrels, no falcons. We did have olive-sided flycatcher. We did have least flycatcher. But remember when we were talking about that least flycatcher, if we didn't know what it was, we knew it was the genus Empidonax. We could put a 1 for Empidonax. It allows you to say, I'm not sure, but I know it was this flycatcher, right? You can do that, or you could just say, I knew it was a flycatcher, but I don't know which one it was. You could go down at the bottom here and put New World flycatcher. No vireos. We had a bunch of crows. I put 10 down for crows. We had a couple of chickadees. We had tree swallows fly over, but let's say we didn't know how many. We just heard them flying around. We never actually saw how many tree swallows there were. What we could do is we could put an X in there. X means we detected it, but we don't know how many there were. We just know that we had them. Per eBird protocols, we don't always want to put in X because that doesn't help the researchers at all. 1 is better than X in this case. So I'm not going to use X. I'm just going to put 1 because we knew we had at least 1 tree swallow because it was making noises tree swallow was making. Right? So tree swallow. We had a ruby-crowned kinglet. We also had golden-crowned kinglet. We had 2 red-breasted nuthatches, no wrens, no starlings that I know of. We had a bunch of robins singing, no waxwings, house sparrows. We had some goldfinches. Let's just say 5. Chipping sparrow, 2 chippers, song sparrow. We had at least 1 song sparrow. We had a few grackles. We had an ovenbird. We had Tennessee warbler. We had Nashville warbler. We had yellow warblers singing. And we had rose-breasted grosbeak. And that's everything that we remember, right? If you remembered, oh gosh, I also had a cowbird. After you submitted the list, you can go back and you can edit that list. But since I don't have all the rest of the time in the world, we're going to say we are done because we submitted a list of all the birds that we were able to identify. If this was just sitting in our car on a phone call, but we were paying attention to birds on that phone call, which we do sometimes in this world if you like birds, you could say, no, I'm not sure this is everything. That's okay. But since we're confident this was everything that we detected, we're going to say yes, and then we're going to click this submit button. And what that will show us is everything we did. We had 26 species, we had 74 individuals. You have this weird little note here that tells us rock pigeon are not a native species. That was new as part of the most recent eBird update, where they document non-native species or feral but established species. If you're in Florida and you had like a monk parakeet or something, that would be an orange one. It's an established one. So this is the full list. But because we were on a walk and there were other people there that use eBird, I, as the person who submitted it, want to share that checklist with people. So I can click share, and everybody I've ever shared a checklist with is in this list. That's everybody. I do a lot of this. So I have a lot of people. But I know my sweetie was one of them. So I'm going to go down and find Jeff, because he's in the J's. And I'm going to find...
Your sweetie?
No, Jeff's not my sweetie. Christina's my sweetie. Jeff came up first. So we're going to put him in. Christina was there. I know Vicky uses eBird, so I'm going to find Vicky right away. And Vicky's down at the bottom because it's just her email. There's Vicky. Let's see. Who else do I have that uses eBird?
Clint, if you,
Yeah.
if you reported seeing a Montezuma quail,
Yes.
would they catch that?
You bet they would. Do you want to see what it looks like? Okay, let's do it. Anybody else on the walk that uses eBird? Yes.
Marcia Nelson or Marshall.
And I think
Is that a Ken W. Nelson?
I think it would be. Let's see. Unless it's one of these ones, Marsha. Is it under? No. We're gonna find it. We're gonna find it. If not,
Clinton, do you share it through the email or the login user?
either or.
Okay, either or.
It all
The
depends
code
on
works.
what
Okay.
comes up when I enter it.
Okay.
Because for some people it'll come up both ways. So like if
Yeah.
I was looking for Christina, I could look for Christina or I could look for her username.
Gotcha.
Or for Jeff, I could look for Jeff or I could look for his username or his email. Whatever somebody
I
has
just
given
didn't
it to me.
realize that it worked also with the email, unless it was also your username.
Yeah, yep. So let's say, Marcia, that this is a new one for me. And so your email,
It's Ken W. Nelson 5@yahoo.com.
Yahoo. All right, and so now we share, and that ships off to everybody. So let's say our Montezuma quail question. We can edit this species list, and we can look for it, right? Let's look for floating. It doesn't match, okay? So then we need to go to add species, and what that will automatically do is it's going to automatically ask us for more information. So it's going to automatically come up with it needs details. Details means a description, right? So we could write a description. We might have a photo. We could plop in a photo into here. Maybe we recorded the sound. We could plop in the sound. Let's just say we were being sneaky and all we did to satisfy the computer is press spacebar because that's all we need to do. Because then it says we've written something, right? We're gonna go complete that checklist and then we're gonna go save. And so what's gonna happen automatically here, because we have it on the list, one of two things will happen. The first thing that will happen, depending on how rare it is, it will hide the checklist automatically until the person who is reviewing the checklist goes through and says, oh yeah, we know that the bird has been here, I'm gonna go ahead and accept it. Or I'm gonna get an email that says, hey, you submitted this bird on this day, you didn't put any information in there, but we wanna know more information because it's rare. And then what you would do is say, okay, here's my notes for that bird, you send it away, and they will say, yep, great, I like it, and they will clarify that report. It'll be unhidden, you'll be able to see it. Or they will say, more, give me more, right? In some cases, you'll get 5 or 6 emails with somebody who's reviewing to do that. But we know we didn't have it, so we can just go ahead and go remove. Are you sure? Yep. And then we're back to normal. So there is a set of checks and balances. There is a way that there are people looking. For our area, it's Jim Lind. Jim Lind is looking at all the checklists with rare things in this area, and he will send you an email if it's a bird he didn't know about or if there wasn't enough information or what have you. And that's for everybody. That's something that exists. If you are an eBird reviewer, you still get reviewed. If you're a person who's new, you get reviewed just like one of the people who've already been doing it forever does. And so it's a really nice set of checks there.
Judy.
Yes.
Can you do that more?
Yes, I can, Judy.
see.
Yes. Yes, and then Jeff is coming to whisk me off the court here. And if I can't find it fast, I will just send it to you when I get home. But there it is. And I can share, and then it's been shared. Okay.
Is it the same people that review a given area?
Yes. Yep. And some states have really fine levels of review. Minnesota doesn't really. The person who has it has been slowly giving up space. So like, for example, Jim reviews St. Louis, Lake, and Cook counties. There's one person, Bruce Fall, who does the whole rest of the state except for 3 metro counties. And then Ezra does 3 metro counties. So depending on where you are, there's different levels. Depending on the state you're in, it could be people on the Rarebird boards. It might just be somebody who uses eBird a lot, right? It really just depends where you are as you go. So any final questions for me about this in our quick little review of eBird?
Is there any way that if somebody is in a rare bird
Yes.
on Park Point,
Hmm?
that I would get a notice for that?
You bet. You bet there is. Let's see. We want to do that under Explore, I think. So at the bottom here, species you need, right? You can do target species. You can do alerts. If you do alerts, that will let you know when something rare gets reported. But I would say you can do this target species list, because likely if you're looking for that thing, you haven't seen it yet, and it will tell you that. And then you'll get an email and say, oh, somebody reported this on Thursday, here's where it was, or whatever.
How did you get that?
So this is on the Explore tab. So under Explore, and then we just scroll down to species you need. And there's a target, and then there's alerts. Yeah. And this is, to clarify, this is on the web portal.
Yeah, it's different looking.
Correct. The formatting is entirely different from here than it is on there. So from eBird app, the same functionality kind of exists, but not nearly to the same level.
So the computer is better.
For some of this fine stuff, absolutely.
Or you
Yeah.
you go to your web browser
Yeah.
and go to ebird.org.
Yeah.
So like you're gonna go to any website, just
Yeah.
plug that in instead of using your app.
Yeah, so on the app, so the whole camera is here, we could do a whole another one just for the app. But from the app, you can do this submission piece very fast. That's what this is meant for, is the fast submissions. It's not necessarily meant for the level of like, here's how we can use it.
But you can find the submission list.
Correct. Yeah, and that they just added that Explore piece. So this Explore that we were looking at here, this is brand new to the app. This was something that didn't exist 3 months ago. This was just on the bottom of the front screen here. So if we go to this page, Explore is right here, right in the middle. And then we can do some of the same looking, right? We can type in species, we can look at hotspots. We can do a lot of that from here. For me, it's just easier to see it. Yeah, it's really difficult to use it on
The
here.
only way I could find it was to do a search, whether it's there, the name of their
Yeah.
search, and
Then it can do it. So again, I think this was more for people who were just interested in doing some of the website functionality on the phone. It's not as good as this is, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Very good point. Okay.
So,
Yes.
can I just ask?
Yep.
A couple things. One is, how can you submit a checklist if it's like a couple weeks old?
You bet. Yes, indeed. So the question there was, can you submit a checklist if it's a couple weeks old? Yeah. Yeah. The way that I am, it really bugs me if it's more than a week that I haven't submitted something. I have friends who still have checklists they haven't submitted 5 years old or more. They can still submit that checklist. That happens a lot when you're not in areas of reception, like if you don't have reception on your phone. Out in the field, if you were to try to do a checklist here, it would save all of your data because your phone has all that GPS data on it.
Something special to save it then?
Nope, you can just close right out and it'll save it
And
automatically.
it'll save it out.
Yep. So let's say if I was starting a checklist right now, I'm going to start a checklist, and I get distracted because Jeff wants to have a meeting, right? I say, oh, sorry, Jeff. I'm going to go through and just close it out. I can go back in, and then I can go under checklists, and you can see there's my checklist because the GPS is already. You don't have to download anything at all. It's the website. eBird.org, yep, and if you have an account already, you log in with that account, and then all of that accessibility is there for you. Sure.
That answers the question.
Good. Any others before I really get kicked out of here?
One more. Sorry.
One more, okay, good.
What's the difference between like doing a checklist, but you only have one species,
Mhm.
or an incidental?
Great question. So, if you submit a checklist with one species as a complete checklist, that is telling the people who might be using that data that you only submitted that one bird. You only had that one bird there. Where an incidental checklist, let's say you were going to a place for snowy owl, but you didn't want to bother counting the pigeons, and so you just typed in snowy owl and incidental, that lets the people know that, yep, there was at least a snowy owl there. There may have been more things, but this person just submitted that bird of interest.
And that is not listed as a checklist then?
It is, yep. So if we go to my thing, if we go to my thing, and we go to this page, I'll go back to the first step. Let's just click on St. Louis County. Oh, here we go, sorry. Oh, I don't know this. Why is it doing this? All right. It is because I'm right. My eBird, here we go. All right, so you can see over here, I have 4,088 checklists in Minnesota, but I have 4,380 total. That's because I've submitted 200 and whatever incidental checklists. Most of those are driving, so like going down the highway and it's a red tail or a rough leg or something, right? I can do that. I didn't count all the pigeons. I didn't count the starlings. I didn't listen for sparrows, that sort of stuff. Some people really like to follow the rules with that, incidental versus incomplete, or incidental versus complete checklists. I don't like incidental checklists, and so I don't submit a lot of them, unless I have to, sort of. So I preferentially will take that extra 3 or 4 minutes just to like count 4 or 5 pigeons, plus a red tail, plus a snowy owl, whatever, right? And so both of them are still useful. That data gets submitted one way or the other, but it's just interpreted differently by the people looking at that data.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, like, is there a minimum time you can spend? Is it like
1 minute's the minimum.
1 minute? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to spend a minute, but I don't think you could submit
Because
less
it's like
than
the
that.
driving the car thing, it's like, oh, I saw that. You know,
Yeah.
well, that's.
It doesn't ask you for a timestamp where it's incidental.
Yep. So that's the benefit to incidentals too. Yeah. Again, and that's why I mentioned driving. Don't use your phone and drive. Don't whatever. But that's what it is for. If you're a passenger and again you're just doing checklists because you're doing something to keep yourself busy, incidentals are the way to go. There are protocols for like if you're on a boat and doing a pelagic. There's protocols for like strings of checklists more than 10 miles. They want you to break up that 10 miles into pieces. If you submit it, let's say you had a 50-mile long checklist, it will hide that checklist because the distance is too great. They want you to further refine it. Because again, it just helps the research for sure. Okay, if you have more questions, I'll be here. But it's time for an annual meeting.
Yeah, let's give our thanks to Clinton for. Let's take 2 minutes just to come up and get an agenda, a financial report,
Snack.
Minutes from the last annual meeting, a snack, return to our seats. This is a time to leave if you need to leave. Also, there's a sign-in sheet as well, so please sign in for the meeting as well.
And have some snacks. I heard there's snacks.
There's snacks and dessert. Okay. I get a lot of emails like this.
Let's say it's,